Hello, I am Dr. Gladys B. West, 2021 inductee into the Space and Satellite Hall of Fame. I am proud to be a part of SSPI's second season of Space for All podcasts, where we have conversations from a wide array of perspectives of all the ways that space is and should continue to be available in ways which all may participate and from which all may benefit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Better Satellite World, the podcast of Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Lou Zaccarella. Today, we continue our series, Space for All, an exploration into how diversity and the expansion of human possibility and new ideas and technologies are shaping the commercial space industry. This Space for All series is sponsored by Hughes Network Systems, powering the networks on which people everywhere depend. Hughes celebrates 50 years of innovation in 2021. Congratulations, Hughes. The Better Satellite World podcast is also supported by the corporate partners of SSPI, EchoStar Hughes, Access Intelligence, publishers of Via Satellite Magazine, and the law firm of K&L Gates. An additional support comes from the 3,000 members of SSPI and its chapters around the world. In 2013, He Shifeng, then a 45-year-old farmer who was located or relocated in a sweeping urbanization program in China, told the New York Times, "For old people like us, there's nothing to do anymore. Up in the mountains, we worked all the time. We had farms and pigs and chickens. Here, we just sit around and play mahjong." A few observations. He Shifeng was 45, but referred to herself as old. It's clear from that quote and the rest of the story that the life she led in the countryside was meaningful, despite the fact that it would seem difficult and remote for you and I. But it was the life she desired. So here's our question. Is this kind of life sustainable, or can it be reconstituted in places where it is vanishing? It remains predicted that by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in urban centers, some by choice, some forced by government fiat, some by climate, and others by the sheer power of economic despair and lack of connectivity. Connectivity might play a larger role in getting people to remain in rural areas. That's our proposition. That and other social constructions that keep communities intact are being discussed even within the satellite industry. So in this episode of the Better Satellite World, we will examine how space and satellite technologies may empower people in underserved areas by serving them with satellite. We are calling this the rural imperative. Here to help you understand the issue are two people who have ideas and technologies that make the rural imperative a reality. Betty Bonnardel is a systems engineer and president of AB5 Consultancy, a London-based consulting company focused on the space and nuclear industries. She has done landmark studies at AB5, including a study for the European Space Agency in 2018 that led to the idea we will discuss today. Betty is also the president of SSPI's UK chapter, which, among other things, hosts the annual Better Satellite World Awards dinner each December in London. And as if she didn't have enough to do, last May she rekindled a passion and founded a social venture to bring low-cost connectivity to farms and farmers that grow crops for sustenance and local market distribution. Farmer Charlie, so I'm really looking forward to hearing about this from my friend. Where in the sky does this information come from? For those of you not involved in the satellite industry, well, no discussion about a rural imperative is complete without hearing from Hughes. So Bhanu Durvasula, a vice president of the international division with Hughes Network Systems, has also made time to be with us today. Bhanu leads the company's international product and operations team, where he's responsible for product line management of satellite broadband systems. Recently, Mr. Durvasula's efforts have been focused on satellite network technology for community Wi-Fi hotspot and cellular backhaul solutions in support of the company's efforts to bring connectivity to unserved and underserved areas of the world. So we've got a good pairing today. Of note, Bhanu holds several patents and earned his master's degree at Purdue University in the same state where I earned mine, Indiana. So welcome to you both. Betty, I'm going to start with a kind of softball question. Do you think that having 70% of the world's population living in cities and essentially depopulating rural communities like the one that you were around as a child is a viable proposition?
I will answer your question, Lou, but first, thank you so much for inviting me into that very important panel and for the amazing actions that SSPI are doing in terms of the better satellite world, because actually a lot of that, what we're doing with Farmer Charlie is actually enabled thanks to the satellite sector. And we'll hear more from Bhanu, of course. To answer your question about the population, I think eventually we will need to realize that we need to be on the earth, spreading in a way that is possible and that is helping the population to live in harmony with the environment. I am sure that with the devastating effect of the COVID virus, everybody around us has understood the benefit of being also considering the countryside as a viable option. And this is also enabled by the opportunities that people have to work remotely. So one key element of that, as you mentioned, is the connectivity. And if you look back at what the ITU is saying, you still have 50% of the population, of the world population, that is not connected, and that's 2020 figure. So we are still not there, and a lot of that population is actually living in rural areas. So these are the points which for me will be critical to enable that stop in the depopulating of the rural communities, I think. In addition to that is the opportunity of feeding the world, of course.
Yeah, and that's where the world is fed. Bhanu, same question to you. I mean, do you think that having 70% of the world's population living in cities, is a viable proposition? And I'm going to ask a second part because Betty sort of triggered this question. There has to be an interim period because we are continuously moving into denser areas. And so is there an interim solution that satellite can provide if you don't think that this is a sustainable proposition?
Yes, Lou, again, thank you for having me on this podcast. I think this is very appropriate discussion for the times we're in. Clearly, that is a trend that where people are moving from rural areas to big cities. They're moving into these cities primarily for better employment opportunities, education for their children, and better healthcare. This really cannot be sustained as cities, especially in the developing world, are not equipped to handle the influx of this new population. I strongly believe that providing broadband connectivity in the rural areas will address to a large extent the major concerns people have today. And I think it can slow down or perhaps even reverse this trend of migration into the cities. So I think it's imperative for us to recognize the root cause of why this migration is happening, and broadband connectivity is really key to get people to live in the areas they really like to live in.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. Quick question, I didn't ask either of you, but I think I know this question, the answer to this question for Betty, but Bhanu, did you grow up in a small community? Or
I actually seen many. I grew up in multiple countries, from India to the Philippines, in multiple places in the U.S. So I have seen different areas, and I have seen, the kind of challenges people have for doing simple things when they are in rural areas. Whether it's just a banking transaction or getting access to education information. So I've seen the spectrum of how people from small towns to big cities are dealing with the day-to-day lives.
Yeah, and it's quite different. Betty, I believe you grew up in a small, as I recall, near an apple farm, or your grandparents were apple farmers. Did I get that right?
Well, I grew up in the French Alps, and my grandfather is an example of that migration that Bhanu was mentioning, because for economical reasons, he moved from my little village in the Alps with 2,500 people to Marseille, which is number 2 city, or was number 2 city in France, to get a better job, basically. However, he still had a passion for farming, as that transpired, as you mentioned, with the apple farming, and that need to make sure that people would be fed on quality rather than quantity. That was his words. And that was transmitted to me. So I totally relate to what Bhanu was saying, and the issue of the population living in rural areas, and the challenges that they face, and I understand that. So exactly, Bhanu, you're right on that.
Yeah, I also grew up in a small town. It was an agricultural town as well in upstate New York, an area called the Finger Lakes. And I, over time, watched it completely decline. It had an industrial base that went away. Agriculture struggled, but it remained there. And what I observed was that things went completely out of balance, economically, socially, and so forth. And so what always interested me about our industry, the satellite industry, was the ability that we had to stabilize the balance between the urban and the rural. And the degree to which we've tried in the last few years to work on that. Betty, what is your view about the work that you're doing as the smart ag startup Farmer Charlie, and what role do you think it's going to play in perhaps reestablishing this balance? So I guess tell us a little bit about that.
So with the study that we did for the European Space Agency, we realized that you really have a need to develop a solution that is sustainable from a business point of view. And that is achieved if the farmers can afford it. So we are talking to smallholder farmers in emerging countries who live on a very, very low income. The figure of $2 is normally circulated on a per day basis. So with that kind of money, the farmers have to produce their agricultural produce, harvest it, and then sell it, and also live on it. So it's a very, very challenging situation. And what Farmer Charlie is doing is to be able to bring that connectivity at a cost and with a business model that is affordable by these farmers. So we are an information gateway, because what is missing for the individual farmers is to be getting that information that will allow them to increase their yield and revenues, that will then give them the opportunity to grow. So I keep on telling people that we're actually creating growth and value rather than bringing a solution to the farmers, and enabling them to develop better their farming practices.
Yeah. So I mean, you're empowering farmers through the use of information. Again, the connectivity is providing this power.
Exactly. What happens is that you realize that the information such as what seeds could be planted, how to develop the best way to use the fertilizers, is not necessarily well known, because the information is not available. The information is not localized, meaning that the information is available maybe at regional level, but doesn't get into that granularity. And even for weather predictions, when you look at it, most of the time the farmers would receive their advice through a radio program that would not necessarily fit into their needs. So we are trying to get to that level down and really have a tailored approach.
Yeah, and what we're also seeing in places like Winnipeg, Canada, with Farmers Edge, it's a bigger company there. The farmers are getting the information that you're giving them, Betty and Bhanu, and being empowered with regard to negotiating prices for both their crops and also for the things they purchase, and the insurance, because they have more information about their fields and the markets. So Bhanu, this information can only come via satellite. I mean, that's the reality. And so when we talk about the rural imperative, we mean the combination of a policy and an infrastructure that will give the smaller communities and farmers that Betty spoke about an opportunity to build that economic base that can sustain them there for generations. Um, do you have any examples of where Hughes and the satellite option have been part of a rural imperative type solution?
Sure, Lou. I mean, first off, at Hughes, we are passionate about bringing connectivity to a vast amount of population that still has no internet access. With use of satellite, we can reach people everywhere, whether it is in remote islands in Indonesia or villages in the Amazon. And we do this with innovative solutions and with affordability in mind. So, people in many small towns and villages across the world have no cellular service or internet connection to homes, their offices, or public places. Or if they do, it is very poor. This is because it is extremely expensive and in most cases, not even feasible for terrestrial service providers and mobile network operators to get to these areas with cable, microwave links, or fiber. With the latest satellite technology, which uses what we call very high throughput satellites, we are now able to bring 4G LTE, cellular, and high-speed broadband internet connections into these remote areas. And it is clearly becoming a game changer. There is no longer, where we bring in the service is no longer a need for people to travel miles, just to do simple business transactions, talking to their family and friends, and doing many daily things we're so used to, using our smartphones and devices. This connectivity also provides, things like distance learning to schools, access to healthcare professionals, and many other services they lack today. And how are we doing this? There are multiple ways we're bringing in satellite-based connectivity to the remote areas. There are people who can afford more, and for these folks, we provide consumer internet service with direct internet connection to people's homes. And where affordability is a major issue, which is a case in most rural areas in developing countries, we also have community level solutions with cellular service as well as Wi-Fi hotspots. With our cellular backhaul over satellite technology, we are now able to connect cell towers in these remote areas to central or core networks in cities to bring these cellular services, and today we have over 12,000 sites we have deployed over the world with this type of service. One of our largest deployments is with our Bhakti customer in Indonesia. As you may know, Indonesia is a country made up of over 17,000 islands. A lot of people living in most of these islands have no internet access because the terrestrial networks simply cannot reach them. So Bhakti deployed our satellite network technology with thousands of sites across these islands. I mean, as a matter of fact, Bhakti had an honorable mention in last year's SSPI awards for this deployment. Another example is our community Wi-Fi service offering to remote areas in Latin America.
Yes.
In these places, affordability, is a real huge issue. And our solution brings in internet connection to communities with just a small satellite terminal and a Wi-Fi access point that can be installed at for example, like a grocery store. People purchase data packs to access internet that can be hourly, daily, and so on. instead of being locked into monthly service plans.
Mm-hmm.
We have nearly 40,000 such sites deployed either through our own service or through our customers. So these are examples of what we're doing in the rural areas.
Yeah, and as you describe it, I think the listener, even we have a lot of listeners who aren't necessarily in the satellite industry, but in other industries and following the space and satellite business, can see how it is a game changer to be able to provide those levels of connectivity to the community, as you say, at an affordable price. Betty, you even go one layer beyond that. You're going to the individual farmer. So to what extent?
It depends on the models, because
Mhm.
in some communities, it's the business model goes to a community of farmers. In some others, it can go at individual level. I just want to put it in perspective, because I spoke a lot about the emerging countries. However, the National Farmer Union in the UK did a survey in February 2021, stating that 46% of their sample audience believe that the signal they receive is just sufficient or is insufficient for the needs of their businesses.
In
so
the
you
UK
can imagine
now. We're in the UK now, right?
we are in the UK, so you can
Yeah.
see that the problem is not only a problem that is relevant for the farming community in emerging countries, but it's also an issue that is very important, including in the UK, in Europe, in Canada, and the USA, for instance.
Yep.
So there is that market that needs to be specifically met, and their needs be considered in order to allow them to grow and to feed the nations, basically.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, the underserved, because the Canadian government recently announced that it's adding $750 million Canadian to a fund that aims to connect 98% of Canadians to high-speed internet by 2026. And it kind of raises the question with regard to what's the best model for the both of you to get your ideas and technologies to these markets. Bhanu, what policies or regulations might be lacking with regard to helping the smaller farms that Betty's talking about and some of the other villages that we want to stabilize so that people don't end up in cities, watching other people play mahjong?
Yeah, I think what you say about Canada and governments trying to provide connectivity to majority of their rural areas. We see that trend. It's not happening fast enough, but there are initiatives that governments are taking. For example, to bridge this so-called digital divide, the Mexican government has an initiative called Internet para Todos, or Internet for Everyone, to provide broadband access to over 92% of the population in Mexico by end of year 2024.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this includes many locations where satellite connection is the only option. So while this is not happening at the pace, there are plans in place by the governments, and we're working with our customers and partners for the ongoing deployments for this initiative. And we're seeing similar initiatives as we see in Mexico and many other countries in Latin America, as well as other parts of the world. So the trend is right. I think it's just wishing it can pick up some pace.
Yeah, Betty, same question to you. I mean, is there something perhaps policy or regulatory wise that could enable Farmer Charlie to scale?
I think it's very important. There are different aspects. Is that the involvement of the governments and the regulatory means into incentivizing the deployment of connectivity in rural areas is a very important point, and should be supported where it is possible. Now, the task in doing that is immense, because there have been lots of projects about the universal service, for instance, and that concept of bringing internet everywhere, but that doesn't stop the digital divide, and it doesn't stop it for a multitude of reasons. And if I go back, for instance, in Nigeria, where we are deploying, we are actually equipping 21 farms at the moment on a proof of concept. Nigeria, we did a survey in January with a sample of farmers in one of the states, and they received smartphones in 2013 as part of a government scheme. So the government did provide the smartphone in 2013. However, because the cost of the connectivity, the actual deployment of the infrastructure was not there, the phones are actually barely used or used for just sending text messages. So in a way, while there is an opportunity there, we have decided with Farmer Charlie to go the route of being economically viable with the little stipend that the farmers are getting, so that we develop a solution where they can get access to broadband connectivity from their farms rather than the hotspots from their farms, but in a way that they can afford paying. And that is where we bring the difference. And it may be a model that is different, adapted, and of course it is minimal because it's that bringing of information about farming and practices. However, that's where we see that it's a critical element, because that adoption of the technology can only bring benefit if the benefits for the farmers are meaningful in terms of time management, maybe money management, or maybe other aspects which are directly relevant to them. Yeah. In terms of the question about the policies that could be developed, I think the support of small farms needs to be developed further. So there are two elements, and I think in a way, with a Better Satellite World, you've done an amazing activity, and it brings some things that maybe the UN Sustainable Development Goals could learn from, is that there is not only one element without its context. So you cannot look at feeding the country without looking at the population or maybe health issues and etc. You need to take a global view of the problem to be able to understand it. And I think in terms of policies for the smaller farms is looking at it from a climate change perspective at the same time as connectivity, at the same time as enabling the young people to be able to go back to the countryside. So when you try to take all these ingredients together, that's what we're doing with Farmer Charlie. We hope to develop a sustainable model that is going to last for many years.
Yeah, it's really a good holistic approach, and I commend you on the way you've thought it through in terms of where the sweet spot is and how the problem gets solved. Of course, you're an engineer. I would expect that from you, but you're a brilliant one, and this is really I understand that model now and why it could be successful. Bhanu, it's putting a lot of pressure on a Hughes or a satellite operator to say, hey, we can cure the rural imperative, the digital divide issue. However, I want you to take a look at sort of the model of the economy. That example I gave at the beginning really was part of a policy that China had to push people into cities to create the levels of density that would create more consumer spending. So it was really an economic move. And they were saying fundamentally, well, we can depopulate these other places at the expense of a more consumer-driven internal economy. As we come out of COVID now, which is another game changer that nature handed us, is there the possibility, do you envision the possibility via satellite of enabling a more robust rural economy that might make sense?
Yeah, so, COVID has taught us how to work virtually. And I think this has been a success for most part. Companies have redefined their work environments and have learned to use collaborative tools in such a way that a person's geographic location is no longer a limitation for doing their work. The lesson learned from this is that as long as you have a reliable broadband connection, it does not really matter where you work from. For a majority of professions today that rely heavily on the internet. And this opens the option for people to live where they want to, as long as they stay connected.
Mm-hmm.
We have many examples of people using our HughesNet satellite internet service who work and live in rural areas by choice and are extremely productive and happy. One of them is a man named Doug Flukiger, who lives in beautiful mountainous area in northern Idaho. He's an interface designer. He teaches online art classes, and his children live with him and attend school online. And this example, like many others, really show that indeed that broadband connectivity is a key driver for robust rural community. So yeah, I strongly believe that COVID has in a way validated that with broadband connection, you can be anywhere. And if people get to be in the places they want to work from, that's a win-win, for everybody.
Yeah, it sure is. Betty, thinking back, you probably think of your grandfather or can still taste his apples sometimes. Is there a vision for you over the next couple of years to see those types of communities stabilized? And what are the next steps for you over the next 18 months or so to sort of realize that vision?
So if we go back in terms of feeding the world, the Food and Agriculture Organization published a report in July 2020 that was actually based on the 5 years prior to that, so prior to COVID, and the food security level has gone down. So can you imagine where the world is going, where you try to feed the world, and before COVID, you had actually a situation where the food security was worse than what you started 5 years ago. So that is not a good outcome. And the outcome, of course, has been even worsened by the impact of COVID. So yes. I think in a way, COVID is a waking up call into us all understanding that things need to be done, not on a long term, but on a really short term. So we have the ambition to really start connecting farmers, and I'm very happy if we can have the discussion to work together with the like of Bhanu to build that model together, because I really need that satellite sector within the solution to build that solution that actually is going to enable the farmers. We have a community of 10,000 farmers in Nigeria that is ready to be connected. And I've got their aggregator on the call every month saying, Betty, what are we doing about it? So we need to work towards that, and we can develop a solution very quickly, working together. So in the near future, we're going to develop partnerships. We're going to start deploying the solution commercially, both in emerging countries and also trialing some solutions which are a bit more adapted to or pivoted to the European, UK and American markets, for instance, and Canadian, of course. So where the solution is actually answering some needs which are slightly different, but where you have similar issues. So that's what we're going to do in the next 18 months.
Very good. And of course, we have a Nigerian chapter, so I'm sure the UK chapter, Farmer Charlie, and our Nigerian chapter will have some things to talk about as well. Finally, for you, Betty, and then I'm going to close with Bhanu. You also encourage app developers for ag-related apps to contact you. Am I right?
That's right, because differently to some of the systems that are in existence, the solution we have is bringing internet connectivity thanks to a terminal that is typically a satellite terminal into that community. And because we are deploying a private network, we can then install some sensors in the field and also provide the opportunity to be connected through an app store. So the App Store is populated by local apps, and we've looked at different models, and we find that this open platform is actually the better solution, because the local app developers actually understand better the needs of the population, because there is a huge aspect of the adoption of technology. Bringing the technology, the hardware in itself is part of the solution, but the software require a real effort into the adoption. And we're spending within Farmer Charlie a lot of our time and projects into ensuring that we can develop solutions that are suitable for all the community. You have specific issues for women farmers, and the women represent a large portion of the population. So we are trying to develop an approach where the adoption is actually really part of our deployment and our solution.
Yeah, and they're local solutions, and that the wisdom of the community itself, if it's organized, mobilized, and activated, will create this brain gain that you've described. And I think that's the exciting part of this. Bhanu, over to you. I'm tempted to ask you what great things Hughes is going to come up with in the next 50 years, but I'll save that for another time. And I'll ask it this way. What does the ideal network look like for a rural economy by, say, 2026?
So, you know, the ideal network for rural economy in 5 years from now is the one that really improves quality of life for people in many ways. First and foremost, it will have to bring in broadband connections to communities with speeds over hundreds of megabits per second, because, you know, that is the basic need to be able to, you know, provide many applications for folks, you know, from education, telehealth, banking, entertainment, and so many more. And it will, in a significant way, allow people to participate in the workforce and contribute to their country's economic growth. I also see, you know, in addition to broadband to people, I also see a network that enables efficiency and productivity in the areas of agriculture, mining, tourism, and other rural economies. And this will be possible with what is called the Internet of Things, or IoT. And to Betty's favorite subject, you know, take precision farming, for example. You know, this technology uses smart devices with farm automation, and will allow farmers to plant crops in more efficient patterns, you know, plant them at the right time, fertilize at the right amount, you know, water at the right levels, and so on, to ultimately increase, you know, the production yield, and at the same time driving down the operational costs for farmers. There are many other examples on how IoT will significantly boost the rural economies. So clearly, I think, you know, I see the trend towards boosting the lives of people in these rural areas. And we at Hughes are very excited about this future, and, you know, doing our part in making this a reality.
Yeah, and it's a great vision. And again, you've really described a network that sort of wraps itself around these communities and gives them the tools they need to both farm, but to manage other parts of the economy, other vertical sectors that will create the kind of jobs that will keep people there and draw people there to again, go back to our original proposition, to stabilize these places. Well, listen, I thank you both for making the time. I mean, it's just fascinating work that you guys are doing, and I can't thank you enough. And I wish you a lot of success going forward.
Thank you very much.
And Betty, we'll see you in London, hopefully in December, for the Better Satellite World Dinner.
Thank you very much, Lou. And yes, I would like to invite all the listeners to really keep an eye on the Better Satellite World Awards that show the great achievement of the satellite sector. And this session is going to be again a big hit and a big success, and that will be celebrated, as you mentioned, in December, hopefully all together in London. And I cannot wait to have you again, because you're an amazing MC.
Well, thank you, Betty. And London is a great place to be, and to see you in a party had at Christmas time and to be talking about Farmer Charlie is something to really look for the end of COVID for. So I can't wait to do that.
Exactly.
Well, that wraps up our conversation with Bhanu and Betty, two people making a better satellite world. And again, I can't thank them enough. For more information on Hughes, visit hughes.com, and on Twitter, go to Hughes Connects. For more information on Betty Bonnardel, and the Farmer Charlie venture, go to farmer-charlie.com. And if you have an app for ag, upload it, or again, contact Betty. For information about the SSPI United Kingdom chapter, trot on over to uk.sspi.org. Thanks once again to Hughes Network Systems for their support for this series. Stay tuned next Monday for another episode. SSPI is the voice of the space and satellite industry professional, a professional who makes the world better every minute of the day. To learn more about our Better Satellite World campaign and to hear conversations with interesting people like Betty and Bhanu, go to bettersatelliteworld.com. If you're not a member of SSPI and would like to know more, go to sspi.org. If you're a student, your membership is free. You can't beat that deal. Follow us on Twitter at SSPI and check us out on LinkedIn and Facebook. For Space and Satellite Professionals International and our producer, Ana Gomez, I'm Lou Zaccarella. Let's make it a better satellite world. Take care, everybody.